deliver for Oregonians this session. And as I was walking down here, I think we should all remember everyone being back in a completed building, a completed Capitol, the new rooms, the ability for people to meet, the ability for legislators to share a meal in their lounge and talk with each other in ways that up until now, over the last few years with the renovation, was not possible. And the fact that my office is also here in the Capitol helped me also have different meetings as well. I think the kind of tone and success of this session is in part because people were able to spend different time together because the building was done. And for those of you who work here, I think you understand that. So while the president creates a lot of chaos and sends a lot of things towards the states, trying to make things very difficult, Oregon leaders here in the legislature this session stayed focused on protecting essential services, expanding housing, strengthening our economy, and providing new tools to push back on the Trump agenda. Faced with a budget shortfall that was driven by President Trump and congressional Republicans, leaders here in the legislature prioritize steady, responsible governance. And I want to congratulate them on that. As for my 3 bills that I introduced at the beginning of the session, there was strong bipartisan support for my bills. One, creating a pathway for more affordable housing for seniors and manufactured home parks. A bill to cut red tape for our behavioral health workers so we can get more people doing the work they need to do to help Oregonians. And my economic development bill that will help us grow and maintain Oregon businesses, be more competitive with other states, and create good jobs. Together, everyone here in the building tackled the issues that Oregonians care about most. We've stabilized the Oregon Department of Transportation budget. We need to launch a long-term bipartisan conversation about what comes next, and there's more to come on that. You have all, I think, probably received the press release that my office sent out a few minutes, well, about an hour or so ago now, highlighting dozens of bills that I think speak to the focus that legislators brought to this session, delivering those results for Oregonians that they needed to see. And you'll probably figure out that if those bills are referenced in my press release, probably high likelihood that I will sign them. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Governor Kotek, Ariel Yakabazi with Point 6
Hi
News
there.
here. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So if you could kind of give some insight into the move for the gas tax vote, what you think might happen, and coupled with that, are you at all concerned with being on the same ballot as it?
Well, at this point, with the passage of 1599, my understanding is that will be going to the May ballot. Now, I also understand there's pending litigation, so I'll probably stop there. So I can't really say much more about that.
Curious what your role was this session. How, like you mentioned in the beginning, being back in the building changed it for you. How often were you meeting with lawmakers? Where were you meeting them? What was the dynamic between you and the legislators this session?
Well, as you probably all know, I have consistently, since becoming governor, and did this when I was Speaker of the House as well, met regularly with Republican leaders. The difference this session, being able to do it in person in my conference room in this Capitol. So just the ability to know that people can pop down the hallway and have a meeting with me, it just creates a different environment. Even before the session started, I created a series of meetings with our Republican leaders, with the Senate President and the Speaker of the House to talk about the ODOT budget hole. We probably had 3 or 4 meetings, evening meetings in my office, talking about how we were going to solve that problem. And there was good hard work also done with a series of legislators working from the Ways and Means angle as well. And by the first week of session, there was a compromise of how to solve the ODOT budget hole. It's not a long-term solution, but it does get the Oregon Department of Transportation through pretty much the end of next year, until we come up with some longer-term funding solutions. So I think that's an example of when people are sitting down together, having some snacks, talking over some hard issues, we develop rapport, and then it can be compromise. As you heard from Senator Starr, not everyone liked the decision on how to solve the budget crisis in ODOT, but we all came together, figured it out, and it was a true compromise.
Governor Kotek, I'm Victor with K2 News. So, both sides seem to be pretty happy about balancing the ODOT budget without raising taxes. So this gas tax, is this sort of like this long-term solution? Do you strongly believe that? And the other question I also have, so budget cuts were way less than expected. What played into that, and why warn of 5% and 2% cuts if that didn't happen?
Thank you for the question. So we'll start with the ODOT budget. So it came into session with the because of the referral, the taxes that were passed in last year's special session were frozen. So there was approximately a $300 million hole for ODOT. And like I said, people came together with a compromise. Those were still tough choices. And you'll notice if you look at Senate Bill 1601, which is the overall budget rebalance bill, it will show you the things that had to be done to balance the ODOT budget. And you also heard from the Republicans, they had other ideas, but what we ended up doing is only taking resources out of the Department of Transportation's budget to balance their budget. But I want to say that was about more than 130 vacancies, unfilled positions in ODOT. When you have that many unfilled positions, it's going to affect service. I spent some time last week with the regional maintenance crew here for ODOT here in Salem. You know, they showed me their trucks, all the rigs. These are very complex pieces of equipment. They don't have enough people to run some of this equipment. That's what vacancies mean. Also, that compromise for ODOT meant taking money away from projects that will not happen, projects that are important for safety and other things across the state. So when people say that somehow there was an easier way to do this, this was also a difficult way to balance the ODOT budget. It's not also a long-term sustainable discussion of how we fund transportation infrastructure in the state. So I fully anticipate we will be talking about that again in 2027. As it relates to the overall budget, coming into legislative session, there was a budget hole, $600 million. People were asked to do reduction lists of 2.5% and 5%. My agencies were asked to give to the legislature cut lists. Legislators looked over those closely. The reason that you don't see the types of cuts is for two reasons. One, they worked hard at looking at other ways to balance the budget without taking essential service cuts. Again, when you take vacancies and other things in other agencies, it will have long-term impact, but that was their first choice. Then they passed Senate Bill 1507, which is the disconnect from some of the Trump tax cuts. That raised over $300 million. That helped them avoid cuts to K-12 education, universities, and community colleges. So those two things come together to be able to balance the budget. That was a lot of hard work on behalf of the legislators. And just want to remind everyone, because of the Trump tax cuts, the 27-29 biennium budget is even more challenging because of some of the changes in Medicaid. So I'm glad we are where we are. We have balanced the budget. We have maintained and protected essential services, and there are more budget challenges ahead of us.
Governor, one of your priorities is economic development right now. I mean, what I have heard from a lot of sort of business-oriented groups in the building is we like a lot of what is in Governor Kotek's bill, but at the same time, Democrats are doing counterproductive things. They don't love the depreciation piece of the disconnect bill. They think that's really damaging. They don't love the TLT increase or shifting money away from tourism spending. I mean, there's a lot of things where people are saying, we're not sure if this isn't on net a counterproductive session. That's the balance that is really hard to strike, I think, often as a Democratic governor. But what would you say to that sentiment?
I think we have a very strong economic development message for this session. The fact that we have passed a bipartisan proposal to build the Oregon Arena or modernize it to keep the Blazers and create a facility for the future of Portland, really important. My bill passed 4084. We're going to have fast track permitting here in the state where we can invest and show a pathway for large economic development around the state. There's money for regional infrastructure. We are talking about money for industrial and land readiness. Those are really important wins. And this budget environment created a very challenging dynamic. I would argue it is also good for the prosperity of the state when we can fund this biennium, our schools, our universities, and our colleges. That would not have happened without a targeted disconnect from some of the Trump tax cuts that are represented in 1507. That is just the bottom line there. I think cutting our schools would be bad for our state and bad for our economy. And I think legislators did a good job of trying to be very measured in that approach. There were a lot of people came in earlier in session where they wanted to disconnect from all of those tax breaks. Mm-hmm. That's not what happened. So I think it was thoughtful, strategic work to say we need to do something because we got to balance the budget, because that's also bad for our economy if we cut our schools.
I have one more quick question. Just The Bay Area Hospital thing was a very big bill in this building for the last 2 days, and I mean, I'm not sure I've seen as much emotion when bills passed. It wasn't on your list at the end, and there are some folks that have supported you in the past that really don't like it. Do you know where you stand on it?
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to review the bill, but my understanding is, given the nature of the fiscal crisis facing that hospital, it was important to do something in this session. We have a crisis of access to rural health care right now across the state, and that's one of the reasons we worked so hard to make sure the state was well positioned to get some of the rural health care money that came out of Washington, D.C. That's why I have fought for more maternity care services. So I don't think anyone's too surprised that some of our rural hospitals have challenges. Bay Areas was particularly acute because of some previous decision making, and I also know sometimes at the end of session, when there's only a couple bills left, everybody just gets very worked up on a particular bill. If people are concerned about the money that is backing up that hospital, that can be revisited next year. But most importantly, the hospital has some certainty right now around their fiscal situation, and I think that's a win for Southern Oregon.
When it comes to campaign finance, the good government groups have vowed to take to a referendum their issues with House Bill 4018. We repeatedly hear lawmakers say it will enforce contribution limits. The good government groups have pointed out a number of ways in which it in fact does not. And a lot of those aren't delayed. They have to do with how you characterize groups, sole purpose, how you characterize contributions. They've said if you sign this bill, they will go to the referendum. What would you say to them? Will you sign it? Are we preparing for another referendum on or rather a long delayed referendum on campaign finance?
I'm going to review the bill. There's a lot in there, so I'm not going to say whether I'm going to sign it or not at this point.
Were you involved in any of those conversations with campaign finance?
I was not. Not personally. However, I kept reminding people that we need to stay the course that was established in the 2024 session, to establish contribution limits and not to delay their implementation. There are other things in that bill that I need to understand.
We had a remote question from Noticias Northwest who couldn't be here. They want to know if, given that the legislature has passed several initiatives to protect immigrants, whether you've reviewed these bills and are planning to sign them into law, and specifically whether you'd be prepared to face potential federal lawsuits that might attempt to block some of these measures.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Again, I'm going to be careful about saying I'm signing any particular bills. However, I do list 13 bills in my press release that I'm going to call my states' rights bills, and that are pushing back on the Trump agenda. And there's high likelihood that I'll be signing all those bills.
We've seen some confusion from progressives and conservatives in this chamber on some of your efforts on economic issues. I know you announced this universal pre-K effort to study it after you've criticized preschool for all in Multnomah County. Your Economic Development Council reportedly had some members who were frustrated with your position on the disconnect. You didn't get the endorsement of OEA, and I know there's some dispute over the Working Families Party part as well. And we often hear Republicans question where your Prosperity Council is when there are bills they don't like on the floor. And there was the change on data centers that it seemed like you support the one-year moratorium now.
I'm happy with where my bill landed, yes.
I guess I'm just wondering, has anything about your governing philosophy changed, and how much is the election influencing that? I know you told my colleague earlier that your values haven't changed as a progressive, but we're seeing a lot of confusion on that, so I'm just wondering where you stand.
I know, it's so surprising. So here's the thing. I am a progressive and I am pragmatic, and anybody who has watched me in my almost 20 years in public office can show time after time I have brought people together and said, you need to figure things out. And ultimately, when it comes to prosperity, we have to create more jobs. We have to be willing to push to say, how do we maintain our values, but also say we are open for business and we are competitive with other states. I think we have reached a good place in this session. There's certainly more work to do. The Prosperity Council will be bringing me recommendations for next year's session. And I've told people, One of the ways that we will have the resources we need to pay for our schools, to pay for our services, if more people have really good paying jobs and they are able to pay income taxes to help support the services that we all need here in the state. And that is my, hope there. When it comes to the early childhood roundtable, that is an issue that we have heard from around the state, that childcare, access to preschool is a working families issue, it's an early learning issue, it's a developmental issue. And I'm looking forward to having the opportunity next year to start that path to universal preschool across our state, because that is also for the future economic prosperity of our state.
Are you able to, once those recommendations come, will you publicly share that with all of us
For the early learning?
from the Prosperity Council?
Yes. So, the Prosperity Council will be providing me recommendations, I believe, middle of the year sometime. And we will certainly be talking about them. We will be talking, outreach to get feedback on them. And then that will be helping me form my next recommended budget and my legislative concepts for the 2027 session. So they will be more public. And that's true for a lot of the groups. The Data Center Advisory Group will have public recommendations eventually here as well. As you can see, I am teeing up some very, very important issues for the 2027 session and beyond, things that we know we need to solve in this state, building prosperity around the state, making sure we have early childhood, making sure that when we do prosper in this state, it does not have adverse effects on our environment. All of those things have to be addressed. And so it's going to be a busy year for me in addition to this other thing I'm doing. So,
Governor Kotek, so you signed SB 1599 after the Secretary's requested deadline. He's now been sued twice. I guess I'm curious what your message is to Oregonians who are now trying to scramble and either come up with the money to put something on the voters pamphlet or have just a few days to collect the signatures and feel like they're kind of being blocked out of this public participation process.
I think that's a better question for the Secretary of State. I trust that he's going to provide enough pathways that folks can be heard. And again, if it is on the May ballot, it is going out to everyone who is a registered voter to have their voices heard on a matter that they have said they want to have their voices heard on at the ballot.
Governor, yesterday I did a story about Washington County. They basically don't have any shelter beds available because they can't keep up with the amount of people who are being homeless. And some blame the amount of evictions happening, especially after the last session. And in fact, they said that there were like 2,000 evictions across the state in February. So is there anything that being done, any talks about that to sort of help people preventing evictions essentially?
Well, it is accurate to say that the budget that the legislature passed last year, this current budget, did not provide as much eviction prevention dollars as we had in the previous biennium, and that has impact. And you could take that up with our legislative budget writers, but it does have impact. And we are maintaining the shelters. That was what was funded in the budget, to make sure shelters across the state are being funded. What is happening to help there is making sure the eviction money that we do have, there was some eviction prevention money in this year's budget, making sure that it is being maximized in local communities. So instead of paying 100% of rent, maybe get to 80% so more people can be served. So we're all having to look at, and community providers are looking at how you can make your money go further and serve more folks. We're also making sure on the shelter side that there's more robust rehousing efforts happening. So when folks are coming into shelter, their stay is shorter so they can get into housing faster. So we can help move people into shelters and then out of shelters so you can maximize the number of shelter beds we have. But I'm going to be very honest. I'm sure you're seeing in Multnomah County and in the city of Portland, they're going to have less dollars for the services that are currently underway to help folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. We are in a budget crisis. We're going to see some of that. And so what I would urge Oregonians across the state, we've built a system that is working for folks. We're going to have to do more. We're going to have to dig deep. We're going to have to figure out how we can do as much as we possibly can with the dollars we have, because it does not get easier in the next 2-year budget because of the changes in Washington. Cannot say enough, one of the most disappointing things about this session from my standpoint is the hundreds of millions of dollars that that legislators had to put in the budget to fund changes to Medicaid and SNAP that have the dual purpose of kicking people off programs and then making it more administratively burdensome to run those programs. That is a direct effect of President Trump's bill and what Congress passed. That is less people getting help. That is costing us more money, and that certainly does not help us serve people when we need resources for folks who are suffering.
There are two more.
We went into this session obviously with a lot of state lawmakers staring down the same weird gray area between what you can and cannot do when it comes to federal law enforcement, immigration tactics.
Yeah.
Is there anything you look at in this session that feels like a big win? And is there anything that you're like, we have not resolved that, it is still way too ambiguous, we need to come back to it next year, no doubt this will come up in your campaign for governor again. What would you say about that?
Well, with the Trump administration, we learn literally daily about new things, and we have to think of new ways to protect our state and stand up for our citizens. And I counted at least 13 bills in my press release that range from public lands to law enforcement wearing masks to all kinds of range of issues that we only have to take up in Oregon because of what the Trump administration is doing. So I would anticipate if the tools that were that are going to be passed this session don't completely help, there will be more bills next year to make sure we can do what we can here in the state.
I guess, sorry, maybe I just got it, specifically immigration enforcement.
Well, I think the ones you're seeing that folks have worked hard to understand what we can do as a state and try to push in an area that, frankly, we didn't think we'd have to deal with, like federal agents, for example, wearing masks. There's a bill to address that. Making sure that when people come to your home that they actually have to have a warrant. It's surprising we actually have to have legislation for this, right? So other things around discrimination, healthcare facilities, educational settings, all of these things, legislators put their best foot forward. They said, let's try these things. They're going to come into law, see if they work. If we not, we'll be back next year. We have to protect our communities. We should not be having these kind of due process conversations in our state.
Just to follow up on that, there was an interesting bill that passed the House both this session and last session that Representative Evans pushed that would have clarified the National Guard's role. It didn't pass the Senate, so it's kind of a moot point. But I'm curious if you got engaged in that conversation at all, or if you would be supportive of that concept.
Yeah, I saw that bill and really appreciated Representative Evans and others bringing it forward. It's exactly what I was doing in Portland. Pushing back on the Trump administration, saying the Oregon National Guard should not be used in situations like the president was trying to do. And we did win in the courts. And as a governor who will continue to do that, right now we don't need the bill. Maybe in the future we would, depending on who has this job. So I can anticipate it would probably be back next year, depending on how the elections go.
Governor, do you think the Blazers should have any amount of fiscal responsibility for the Moda Center renovation above and beyond, I guess, cost overages? Oftentimes we see NBA teams paying for a piece of their arenas or arena renovations, and that doesn't seem to be part of the plan this time.
Well, what's interesting about the current financial arrangement with the Blazers in Portland, the NBA actually pays the city of Portland to have the Blazers. There's money coming into the city of Portland for the arrangement for the Blazers to be there. So it's not just people taking money out of Portland. Well, there is money coming into Portland from the NBA to have the team there. This is a publicly owned facility. Moda Center, Oregon Arena, however you want to refer to it, that will be modernized without any new taxes. And that will be our asset, ours and like the global public. It'll be our asset. Now, the primary tenant is the Blazers. We still have to negotiate a very, I think, complex deal, but we're going to get the best deal we can for Oregonians who will want to see their team playing in a modern facility that we own as the public. And it's a unique deal compared to other states, but then we don't have sales taxes and other things. So I believe that this is a great first step. We're going to get the best deal possible for Oregon, and the economic impact of keeping not only the Blazers, but all the activity at the Moda is really important for the state.
So it sounds like no. You don't necessarily believe they need to have a more sizable role in funding it.
Well, the income for the folks who play will help fund the debt service for the facilities. So that's a pretty unique role. So there is input to make this happen. But the deal still hasn't been inked. This is the first step in saying we're going to have a modern facility. We're all trying to figure out how to do that. Now you got to come to the table and get the best deal possible.
Thank you, Governor.
Thanks, everyone.
Governor. Appreciate
Have a
it.
good evening.
Oh boy. Yeah, they forgot to do